بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وعظيمنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وأصحابه الغر الميامين. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدي ومولاي علي بن أبي طالب. اللهم صل على الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. أما بعد, respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. It's a pleasure to be back. But this year, the tafsir for the afternoon is something different. In the previous 2 years, we've examined tafsir of the Holy Quran, having looked at the tafsir of Surah Luqman and the tafsir of Surah Al-Kahf. This year, however, I want to examine a masterpiece of Ahlul Bayt. We've already examined the masterpieces of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this year we want to examine the masterpiece of Ahlul Bayt, and particularly the masterpiece of Imam Zainul Abideen salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi, known as Risalat al-Huquq. Now this is something somewhat new, for not many people have examined Risalat al-Huquq, and there are many who would not even have heard of Risalat al-Huquq. For Imam Zainul Abideen, normally his greatest piece of work is the supplication known as Sahifa Sajjadiyya. However, Risalat al-Huquq I feel is relevant in relation to history and in relation to contemporary society and the discussions that occur about the rights of the human being. And therefore what we will examine today is a brief glimpse of the biography of the Imam. Then inshallah tomorrow we will look at the concept of rights in humanity and the different opinions of the philosophers as to what constitutes human rights and how Islam views human rights, and whether secular thought and religious thought on human rights are compatible or no. Then beginning from the third day inshallah, we will begin to look at the first right in Risalat al-Huquq, which is of course the right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over us. And then we will continue after that by looking at the right of the self, the right of the tongue, the right of the stomach, the right of salah, the right of sawm, the right of the father, the right of the mother, even the right of the one who leads salah. We will even look at his right in our community. So inshallah every day, even those of you who can bring a pen and paper to take down a few notes which you can then discuss with the household, it will be very beneficial. Imam Zainul Abideen salawatullah wa salamu alayhi. There is a difference of opinion as to when he was born. And amongst the opinions is that he was born in the 38th year of Hijrah, which would mean on the 10th of Muharram he was around 23, 24 years old. And then they say that he died on the 95th year of Hijrah, highlighting that the period of his imamate was approximately 34 years. Why? Because the event of Karbala happened on the 61st year of Hijrah. And so therefore if he died in the 95th year of Hijrah, it would mean that he lived after the 10th of Muharram for about 34 years. And it's a shame that many of us, when we look at these 34 years, the majority of the knowledge that you hear about him is that he cried. And every single time you hear about Imam Zainul Abideen, after the 10th of Muharram, you hear he cried. He saw this incident, he cried. He saw that incident, he cried. Whereas in those 34 years after the 10th of Muharram, there were many important incidents which occurred, which we will come to in a moment. Because when you examine the legacy of any great human being, the legacy is either left behind in that which he wrote, number one, or in that which he spoke, number two, or in that which he acted, number three, or the children he left behind. And he left behind 5 children who I will examine in a moment. But in terms of the first area, his mother was Shaharbanu, the famous Iranian princess. Now the aspect of an imam's mother being an Iranian princess is a very important concept. Why? Because it highlights therefore that Imam al-Hussein did not marry from his own culture. Imam al-Hussein is from Medina. So if we were to have the idea that Imam al-Hussein should marry anyone, he should marry a girl from Medina. Because many times in our communities we restrict our marriages. To the extent I know some people who tell their children, forget marrying someone from their own country. You marry someone from the street we lived in. There's 8 families in the street we lived in. You marry one of them. Or you marry someone from the village. Or you marry someone from the city. Or you marry someone from the country. Normally you keep the person within the country. Whereas the Imam married somebody from Iran, and on top of that an Iranian princess. The aim was what? The aim was Inna akramakum indallah atqakum. The best amongst you in the eyes of Allah is not the one who came from the same street as me, not the one who came from the same village as me. Culturally, yes, we know each other, we know your food and you know my food. So we're not going to have an argument. When I come home, you know how to cook. And you know what I like to eat. But more than that, sometimes there's not enough substance. You look and you think culturally you know all the secrets, but religiously there's nothing. I've married a body, not a soul. Whereas sometimes when you marry somebody from a different culture, if the iman is there and the akhlaq is there, then what's wrong with marrying somebody from a different culture? As long as that madhab is the same madhab of Al Muhammad, then you are able to have the same principles which were taught to you by Ahlul Bayt. That's why if you look at the other Imams of Ahlul Bayt, their wives were not from even the same country as them. 6th Imam, his wife was from North Africa. From where? North Africa. You know the Berber of Morocco? The Berbers they call them, of Morocco and possibly modern day Algeria, that region. That's where his wife was from. Her name was Hamida. And when he married her, he says that she is Hamida in this world and Mahmuda in the hereafter. Meaning she is praised in this world and full of praise in the hereafter. Why? Because he didn't find himself someone from his community who was simply somebody who will serve him. No. He wanted her to be someone who can serve the religion of Islam. So what would happen whenever people would come to visit the Imam? If it was a female, he would say, go and see my wife Hamida, because her answers are exactly the same as mine. Imam Sadiq, for him to say that somebody's answer in fiqh is exactly the same as his, shows you just how knowledgeable this girl is from North Africa. Not from Medina, not from Mecca, not even from Kufa, not from Basra, from North Africa. Let me give you another example. 11th Imam married a Roman princess. I used to always beg my mother, let me marry an Italian sister. She said, what do you mean Italian? Marry from the community? What do you mean you go and marry Italian? I said, 11th Imam married an Italian, can't I marry an Italian? 11th Imam's wife is a Roman princess. Narjis Khatun, the mother of 12th Imam, is a Roman princess, originally from the Christian faith, who came towards the religion of Islam. However many times her dad would try and marry her off, he couldn't. He tried to make her marry the cousin, but everything did not work as planned. Eventually she boarded a ship when her father had a major war with the opposition. She boarded a ship. On this ship, she disguised herself as one of the Muslim slaves, until eventually on the banks of the Euphrates, she was bought by the representative of our 10th Imam to marry Imam al-Askari. Imam al-Askari could have easily said, Mom, I only want someone from Medina. Or even, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's say he says, I only want to marry someone from Samarra. Considering he's buried where? Samarra. No. I want to marry someone who you believe will serve this religion. And subhanallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose that his proof on earth who will rise and bring justice will be born from someone originally from Rome. It goes to show you that when the religion came, the aim of the religion wasn't looking at race. Because there are many from the same culture, you wish you could throw them somewhere else into a different culture. And there are some from a different culture, you wish you could tell him, come join our culture because your behavior is so beautiful. Therefore, the Imam's mother was Shahar Banu. She died, according to narrations, 10 days after she gave birth to him. So therefore, she wasn't present on the 10th of Muharram. She gave birth to him, and then she died. Hence you notice that in his supplications and in Risalat al-Huquq, he has an unbelievable respect for the mother. You know, when you never saw that mother, it's as if your heart pours out reaching her. Or those whose father died when they were young, it's as if they want to talk more about their father, even though their father died when they were young. It's like someone who's lost a child. They want to talk more about the child, even though the child died when they were young. Likewise, you find the Imam, because of not being able to see his mother, he talks so much about the rights of the mother. It's as if he yearned to have a mother in his life. When we look at the Imam, you see the first area of the Imam, and when we want to look at his legacy, is the area of his legacy in terms of his actions. Why? Because when you hear the stories of any Imam, the aim in listening to these stories can be two things. Either it just can be that, okay, it's a piece of history, I will listen to it and that's it. Or the aim is that I will take that story and apply it into my own life. And when you look at the life of our fourth Imam, the first area which is very clear in the stories that describe him is his morals. Very clear. That his akhlaq was respected by his friends and respected by his enemies. Because what is a human being without morals? A human being without morals is something which is just a piece of clay. It's the morals that give life to the human being, different from any other creation. The Imam's morals were seen as being the highest, and this can be seen in a number of stories. Look at a couple of examples. Abdul Malik ibn Marwan was the Khalifa of Bani Umayyah for 21 years. He was the son of Marwan ibn al-Hakam. You see, Bani Umayyah, the first Khalifa of Bani Umayyah is Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, if we were to take Uthman bin Affan on the side. Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, then you had Yazid, then you had Muawiyah, the son of Yazid, then you had Marwan ibn al-Hakam, then you had Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. Abdul Malik ibn Marwan was Khalifa for 21 years. And his period of rule, unfortunately, is not a reflection of what Rasulullah wanted in his Khulafa. He had a governor in Medina who was his father-in-law, Hisham ibn Ismail, father-in-law of Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. Hisham ibn Ismail was known as one of the worst and most severe governors of Bani Umayyah. As in literally, if he doesn't like you, then you're sent straight away to the dungeons or you're killed just because he doesn't like you, not because you've wronged anyone. That Ibn al-Musayyib was lashed 60 times even though he was revered as one of the writers of ahadith. Hisham ibn Ismail used to particularly offend Imam Zainul Abideen. In which way? For example, if Imam Zainul Abideen leaves his house, this person comes and nudges him, or he pushes him. He has these ways with him, or makes people come in his way when he's walking. When Abdul Malik ibn Marwan died, he was succeeded. And when he was succeeded by Walid, Walid appointed whom? Walid appointed Umar ibn Abdul Aziz As whom? He appointed Umar ibn Abdul Aziz as his governor. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, I have studied his life to tell you that there are many inclinations towards Ahl al-Bayt in his life. Number one, he gave Fadak back to Imam al-Baqir. The land of Fadak, which was taken from Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam, was given back by whom? Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. Number two, he stopped the abuse against Amir al-Mu'mineen. Every Friday, they used to abuse Amir al-Mu'mineen in the khutbah, whereas he stopped it. And when he became governor of Medina, he got Hisham ibn Ismail, even though he was his own family member, and he tied him in front of the house of Marwan. And he said, anybody who has any grievances against him, come forward now and put forward your grievance. Hisham ibn Ismail, when he was put in this area where you're roped, he said, I do not have any fears except from Ali ibn al-Hussein. Said to him, why? He said, because Ali ibn al-Hussein, I offend him and hurt him very much in his life. I don't let him rest when he leaves his house. So I don't fear anyone who I have hurt except Ali ibn al-Hussein. I fear that he's going to come back and avenge me. Now some of us, when we are wronged for a single moment, somebody accidentally wrongs us, suddenly we jump. How dare you? Who do you think you are? Who are you looking at? What's wrong? Imagine for years you leave your house and you have someone who offends you. Not one moment. Some of us, one moment we jump. Try driving and somebody cuts you. Look at your reaction. Whereas you find with whom? You find with the Imam, when he heard Hisham bin Ismail, some of the companions thought, surely now Imam Zainul Abideen is going to go and slap him, or the Imam is going to go and hit him. No, nothing of the sort. Imam Zainul Abideen was told by his companions, Hisham ibn Ismail, the man who used to always impede you and get in your way, is now being held for those people to take retribution. Do you know what the Imam said? Imam said, I want you to go near Hisham ibn Ismail, and I want you to say to him that if he is hungry, our house will give him food. And if he is thirsty, our house will quench his thirst. And if he has any loan which is outstanding, we will look after that loan. The companions didn't have it in them to go. The Imam went near him. Imagine Hisham bin Ismail is roped. All of a sudden he sees Ali ibn al-Hussein coming towards him. When he sees Imam Zainul Abideen coming towards him, he looks at him. Then all of a sudden he thinks to himself, surely now he's going to hit me. Imam sat near him. Imagine now in your position, and I am being roped. He came and sat down and he said, Hisham ibn Ismail, I am here to help you. If you feel you have been wronged in any way, then we can help you. If you are ever hungry, or you are ever thirsty, or you ever have a loan, we will be the first to help you. Here it goes to show you that he embodied the akhlaq of the Imams before him. That when you are wronged, do not reply back with a wrong, because two wrongs do not make a right. When you are wronged, reply back with forgiveness. Why? As the Imam himself says, forgive people as you'd want Allah to forgive you on the day of judgment. Many times we have a problem with someone, we don't forgive. They send the president of the community, we say no. They send our grandparents, they say no. They send different members of the family, we say no. And until everybody comes, we will say no. In the same way on the day of judgment, this person will try and intercede for you. Allah will say no. That person will try, no. He will try, no. In the same way, in this world, many interceded and you rejected them. Everyone who intercedes for you on the day of judgment, I'll reject them as well. The Imam wanted to bring this philosophy. Therefore, in the first area, what do we find? The area of the akhlaq of the Imam. Number two, the words of the Imam. One of the most beautiful ahadith of the Imam, which we take as a glimpse today, because we said it's a glimpse of his biography. There's a beautiful hadith which we could take today. Somebody once came to the Imam. He said to him, "Oh Imam, somebody has been doing ghiba on you." You know, we have people in our community, they come and tell us, this person has been backbiting you, that person has been backbiting you. Imam looked at him in a sense of disappointment. The person said, Imam, what's wrong? I just came and told you someone has been backbiting you. He said, that person shot the arrow, but you made sure it reached me. Think about it. There are many arrows which are shot throughout the day. Do we agree? Each one of us shoots an arrow. But there's only a few of us who make sure that that arrow reaches the intended target. The problem sometimes isn't the shooter of the arrow, it's the one who guides where it reaches. Imagine now that you have a bow and you have the arrow and you shoot. Now that arrow can go anywhere. But then someone holds it and says, wait, you arrow, come with me. I want you to come to someone's heart. I'm going to pierce you in the heart. The Imam, this one hadith he has, can be studied in a million ways. That when you hear somebody has spoken about you, Imam Hassan says there's 4 fingers between what is right and what is wrong. And they are between the ears and the eyes. That which you hear, verify by your eyes. Whenever anyone comes and tells you something, that's why many in the community, because of this, you find many people do not come to the programs of the community. Why? They say everybody in the community backbites me. Everybody speaks about me. Listen to what Prophet Musa says. Prophet Musa, when he said, Ya Allah, everybody backbites me. Everybody speaks about me. Ya Allah, why don't you stop them? Allah replied, I haven't given myself that honor. People talk about me and they speak about me, yet I let them. So why should I give you the honor if I don't give myself the honor? True? Don't you see people say there's no God? Don't you see people blaspheme about God? Has He stopped them? No. In the same way, it is part and parcel. But we have to make sure the arrow which is shot does not reach the intended target. When we hear something, that's why they say the listener to ghibat is worse than the one performing the ghibat. The listener is worse than the one who performs. Because the listener's telling him, come on, continue, I want to hear more, I want to hear more, this is interesting. That's worse than the one who's even speaking. Therefore, this is a glimpse of his words, and that's why you know, in the court of Yazid in Sham, he stood up against Yazid even though he had gone through a period of illness. And when he stood up against Yazid, the words which he recited highlight just how powerful this tongue is. When he came forward and he said that Allah has granted us 6 and blessed us with 7. He said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted us with knowledge and patience and eloquence and generosity, and the believers' affection for us and bravery. And He has granted us 7. He has granted us Rasul Allah and Imam Ali and Imam al-Hasan and Hamza and Ja'far and Fatima and whom? Imam al-Hussein. And He has granted us Al-Mahdi who will kill Dajjal. Those of you who know me, and those of you who don't, let me tell you who I am. I am the son of Mecca and Mina. I am the son of Zamzam and Safa. I am the son of the one who held the black stone in his abba. I am the son of the one who was taken to Sidrat al-Muntaha. I am the son of Muhammad al-Mustafa. Then he went on to say, I am the son of Ali al-Murtada, the one who annihilated the polytheists until they said La ilaha illallah. I am the son of the one who fought at Badr and Hunayn and who pledged 2 allegiances and who went on 2 migrations, the believer's pious one, the descendant of the prophets, annihilator of the polytheists, commander of the faithful, luminary of the fighters. And he went on until he said, I am the son of the one who was killed on the plains of Karbala. These lines highlighted the power of his tongue. That there were times when he'd instruct you morally, and there are times when he'd speak out when he saw injustice. Then on the next area, would you look at the worship of Imam? Because when he is called Zainul Abideen, when he is given this title, it's because he is the luminary of the worshippers, the best of the obedient ones. Do you know one of his titles was Dhul Thafanat? What was the title? Dhul Thafanat. Do you know why he was given this title? Thafanat is that piece of skin which emerges from the knee of the camel. Because you know a camel, when it sits on the ground, it rubs the knees on really hard ground. I'm sure you've seen sometimes, you look at the camel, you think, how does your leg survive on this really hard ground? What then comes out of the knee is a piece of meat. Some meat begins to grow on the knee. That is known as thafanat, the meat pieces which grow on the knee. He, because of how much sujood he performed, had meat pieces growing from the forehead. To the extent that they said the meat pieces would fall from the forehead from how much he was in sujood. That's why another of his titles was Sayyid Sajjad. That he is the master of the prostrators. Always he would be seen in sujood. Even one day, fifth Imam says, I saw my father in sujood for so long that when he got up, I noticed how much he was crying and he looked like he was trembling from fear. I said, my father, look how great your worship is. He said, my son, this is nothing compared to your grandfather Ali ibn Abi Talib. Imagine, subhanallah, that he is given the title of Sayyid al-Sajjadeen, Zainul Abideen, but he tells Imam al-Baqir, nothing compared to Ali ibn Abi Talib. Imagine what type of worship did Amir al-Mu'mineen perform in the night that he is given that title from his grandson, Zainul Abideen. That fifth Imam, he says on one occasion, the narration states that there was a fire in their house. Everybody ran out of the house. As imagine if I was in Salah or you were in Salah and in the house there's a fire, would we stay in Salah or we jump out of the window? So we'll all jump out. He says everybody ran out except my father. My father remained in his Salah. He said my mother's of course worried, where's my father? He's in his Salah, until my father walked out having finished his Salah. He said to him, Father, I said, you were praying but the house was burning. He said, there is the fire of this world and the fire of the hereafter. And I was more concerned with the fire of the hereafter. Imagine that the mentality is that while he's in his worship, there is an understanding of the essence of the hereafter. Whereas many times when we are in our worship, the mentality is, what meeting do I have today? Okay, 4, 6:30, 7 o'clock, okay, Subhana Rabbi al-Azimi. The mentality is purely world. As in you're in sujood or in ruku' and you're thinking there's about 6 meetings after, or I have to go home, I have to be. Whereas his mentality is purely hereafter. The fire of the hereafter is what I fear, not the fire of this house. The same Lord I am praying to will make sure the fire of this house is not touching me. So therefore in the next area you had the worship. On the final area of the Imam, you had the sons of the Imam, the children of the Imam. Imam had 5 children. And these children are very influential figures. Let me explain. He had 4 sons and 1 daughter. How many sons? 4. Muhammad al-Baqir, Ali, and he had a son by the name of different narrations. One says Ammar, and another son by the name of Zayd. Muhammad, Ali, Ammar and Zayd. And he had a daughter by the name of Khadija, 1 daughter. Her name was Khadija. Muhammad al-Baqir and Zayd are very influential. Why? Imam al-Baqir we know very well about. And we know well about his life. And the fact that he is respected by all schools in Islam. But that other son, Zayd, is also revered by over 9 million people in the world today. You see, when you say the word Shia, many people think the word Shia refers only to Ithna Ashari. But there are 3 different sects of Shia. Ithna Ashari, Ismaili and Zaydi. How many? 3. The Zaydi school, you'll find them in parts, for example, of Yemen or Oman, that area, that region. They all follow the imamate of Zayd following Imam Zainul Abideen. You see, Zayd, the son of Imam Zainul Abideen, is not a small personality. In terms of his respect and in terms of his worship, he is similar to his father. In terms of his respect, one day Rasulullah was next to his companion, his adopted son Zayd ibn Haritha. Zayd ibn Haritha says, I was next to Rasulullah when all of a sudden Rasulullah started crying. I looked at Rasulullah and said, Ya Rasulullah, why are you crying? He said, because my son will be named after you. And he will be crucified by whom? And he will be crucified, and on top of that, it will be within the ummah that he will be a martyr. On another occasion, Rasulullah tells Imam al-Hussein, from your descendants, there will be someone who will be a martyr. And on the day of judgment, he will walk on the necks of people. Meaning what? Meaning people will bow down to him. Even Imam Zainul Abideen told his son Zayd, oh Zayd, one day you will be crucified on the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The narrators living in the time of Zayd, son of Imam Zainul Abideen, people like Muhammad ibn Furat, they come forward and they say that Zayd had the marks of sujood on his forehead, exactly like his father. Some people will ask, then what is so special about Zayd? Why do people revere him as an imam? The Zaydis do not take Imam al-Baqir as the fifth imam. They take Zayd, his brother. Why? Because in their philosophy, the idea is that an imam is one who rises against the oppression of his time. They say Imam al-Baqir didn't rise, whereas Zayd rose against the oppression of his time. So the Zaydis take Zayd as the next imam. Zayd, who did he rise against? He rose against Hisham ibn al-Hakam, the Bani Umayyah Khalifa. You see, the people of Kufa said to Zayd, let's avenge Karbala and what happened to your grandfather Imam al-Hussein. So Zayd said, who do we avenge? They said Hisham ibn al-Hakam. Zayd done something very valiant. As a leader, he went to Hisham. And when he went to Hisham ibn al-Hakam, Hisham ibn al-Hakam, like many of Bani Umayyah, used to have in his house or in his palace Christians, Christian officials, Christian leaders. And what happened was, he had poets who were Christian. Amongst the poets was a man by the name of Al-Akhtal. If you go and read his poetry abuses the Ansar of Rasulullah, the people of Medina. And his poetry abuses Rasulullah. When Zayd was there, he heard Rasulullah abused. He told Hisham ibn Hakam, how dare you have a man who abuses Rasulullah? Hisham ibn Hakam said, who are you to speak to me? What do you want? The Khilafah? Is that what you want? Zayd said, all we want is some sort of justice. He said, you think the Khilafah will come to you? O son of a slave girl. Listen to the mouth. Do you know why? Because Zayd's mother was from Sindh. Sindh? Which part of Pakistan is Sindh? Northwest? Sindhi. They say Sindhi. His mother is from Sindh. She was a slave girl Mukhtar al-Thaqafi gave to Imam Zainul Abideen. From her he was born. And so it goes to show you, he said, my mother has nothing to do with what I'm telling you. Otherwise, Prophet Ismail's mother was a black slave girl called Hajar. True? Prophet Ibrahim's wife Hajar was a black slave girl, yet he married her. Eventually Zayd fought Hisham ibn al-Hakam and he was killed. And today his grave, or the Darih, those of you who visited, is between Hilla and Tuarij. They killed him. When they killed him, of course it needs a major discussion, his life and his killing. But suffice for us to say, he was hung on a tree for 4 years. Nude, hung on a tree. 4 years they didn't give him a burial. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not allow a body of his chosen companions to remain exposed. So there used to be a bird by the name of a fakhita. It's a type of bird. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's as if He inspired it to nest in a way which would cover the areas of privacy in Zayd. Every time the soldiers of Bani Umayyah try and move the nest, it comes back and nests again and begins again. Until eventually they burned his body completely. And therefore, until today, in Oman and Yemen, you have a group of the Shia known as the Zaydis, who follow up until Imam Zainul Abideen, then they follow Zayd. Inshallah, tomorrow we will continue by examining the concept of haqq and huquq in Islam and how it differs from Western thought, before beginning with the tafsir of the Risala til Huquq. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina wa azimina wa habib qulubina wa shafi'a nufusina Abil Qasim Muhammad وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وأصحابه الغر الميامين. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدي ومولاي علي بن أبي طالب. اللهم صل على الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. أما بعد, respected brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Continuing in our discussion of the Treatise of Rights, or Risalat al-Huquq, of our fourth Imam, we stated yesterday that the greatness of any individual is the legacy that that individual leaves behind, either in their lifetime or after they have passed away. And we said that the legacy of the Imam was left behind in a number of ways. We talked about his 5 children who he left behind. We spoke about his words, as well as some of the moral stories and acts of worship which he performed. At the same time, we said one of the greatest legacies which the Imam left behind for his followers were the books which were left behind. In many cases, we find that in our communities, we do not necessarily undertake the examination of these great treasures which were left behind by the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. Understandably, one may argue that there aren't many books which were left behind by the Imams. There are many narrations, but not necessarily many books. So if you ask somebody today, give me 7, 8 books of Imam al-Kadhim, he'll say, I don't even know one book of Imam al-Kadhim. Whereas, for example, one may say that there is a tafsir of the Quran of Imam al-Askari, which is available today, but which many of his followers may not have read. Or even you find that there are certain teachings which were preserved by the students of the 6th Imam, which went under study at Tel Aviv University in Israel by the professor known as Eaton Kohlberg. As you know, in many non-Muslim universities, there are extensive Islamic research programs. And in some cases, the non-Muslims have studied the school of Ahlul Bayt more than the Muslim. And Eaton Kohlberg has written a paper which is available on the internet called Al-Usul al-Arba'mi'ah of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. 400, he looks at 400 narrators who took their message from Imam al-Sadiq and examines their life. What's his surname? Kohlberg. And it goes to show you that there are many who go and research to study whatever was left behind by Ahlul Bayt. Because to them, although these people aren't their spiritual guides, they left good pieces of knowledge. And any human being who leaves a good piece of knowledge is worth listening to. As Amir al-Mu'mineen used to say, don't look at who's speaking, look at what they are saying. Too many times we are concerned with who is it that's saying this. Just listen to what they're saying. If it's wise, take it. If it's not, leave it. Likewise, the Imam left behind a number of books. And the method in which these books were written and the subjects of these books highlights to us a reform program undertaken by the Imam. Why? Because psychologically, when you've seen your father killed in front of you on a battlefield, and you could not do anything about it. How difficult must it be to live after the 10th of Muharram? Especially with the fact that you were ill on that day, and you knew that your father is on the battlefield, but you can't stand up. There were some who, if this happened to them, would never recover. Psychologically, they would be destroyed. And the Imam himself does not deny that psychologically it had an effect on him after that day. How many times do you hear that when he went past the butcher who was about to slaughter a sheep, he would see the butcher give water to the sheep, and he'd ask the butcher, why are you giving the sheep water? And the butcher would say, because it's a creation of Allah, and every creation of Allah deserves water before it dies. And then he'd say, my father was not given water on the 10th of Muharram. Psychologically there was an effect, but the Imam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been chosen as an Imam because he has the patience to be strong in the most difficult situations. Otherwise all of us would have become Imams. As in, what's to deny that all of us could have been Imams, and until today you would have had 100 Imams? No. Imamat is given to he who is able to face each of God's trials and still come out of the trial saying Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. That's why Nabi Ibrahim, when Allah made him an Imam, قَالَ إِنِّي جَاعِلُكَ لِلنَّاسِ إِمَامًا, he made him an Imam after he passed many trials. Then he said to him, now I am making you an Imam for the people. So what did the Imam do? The Imam recognized that the way they killed his father was something barbaric. As in, the Arabs of before the 10th of Muharram would kill you, but not necessarily, for example, humiliate you in death. They wouldn't mutilate your body. Whereas he noticed that these so-called Muslims, only 50 years after Rasulullah died in the 11th year after Hijrah. Karbala happened in the 61st year after Hijrah. Exactly 50 years after Rasulullah died, he noticed that these people had become barbaric. That the religion was more of a culture to them than a religion. And this is a trap sometimes we fall into, where what we call Islam sometimes becomes more of a culture than a religion. Let me explain. Islam can be a beautiful culture. One day you have a birth and another day you have a death. You've got these stories of heroic figures. You've got occasions where you have to dress nicely and occasions where you have to wear black. Sometimes we fall into a trap where the way we follow the religion is more of a culture, and that culture is an aspect of our life which is relative. The culture of Dar es Salaam in 1960 may be different from the culture of Dar es Salaam 2008. In 1960, for example, it might have been seen as something rude if a female walked in the street with her hijab not very good. Whereas in the year 2008, no, it's seen as something of a fashion for her to walk in the street with her hijab not so very good. Those types of followers of the religion see it as a culture depending on the movements of the times. There is a time where I have to be like this, but if my people become more modern, I'll become more modern. There is a time where if I don't attend the wiladat of 7th Imam or 8th Imam, then I am looked down upon. But then there is a time where if I don't attend, it doesn't matter. Half the community hasn't attended as well. That type of way of looking at religion is a culture. I have to fit into a cultural structure. Then there is a way of looking at the religion where these aspects of the religion which some of us view as cultural are not cultural. They are steps of gaining closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When I come to a wilada, I haven't come for a social club to see an old boys club. No. I've come because I sincerely want to gain knowledge about the Imam who was born on that day. Imam noticed that the Muslims of that time had become very cultural. Everything was a culture. Salah became a culture, not a way of rising to Allah. Dua became a culture, not a way of rising to Allah. And this he noticed in the fact that someone like Umar ibn Sa'ad used to pray Salat al-Layl. Umar ibn Sa'ad used to pray Salat al-Layl every night. As in, there are some of us here who haven't prayed Salat al-Layl all our life. Ammar ibn Sajjad used to pray Salat al-Layl every night. But the problem was, his Salat al-Layl was a culture. Everybody else is doing it, so I might as well. It wasn't a consideration of me maintaining a humility and respect for God's creation and their rights. No. Now there was no conception of the rights of others. It became a selfish movement of power. Suddenly, the old Arab tendencies of fighting tribes for power was coming back. It was initiated by the first Khalifa of Bani Umayyah. Then it was initiated in his son, who said, I wish that my ancestors at Badr had been present. Listen to his wording. I wish that my ancestors at Badr were present, so that they could see what I done to the son of Abu Talib. Meaning what? Meaning that in the same way Ali fought us at Badr, now look the way I've treated his son. It became a war of Arabs. There was no more a conception of religion. So Imam said there has to be a reform program. The first part of the reform program was what? He said to his companions, go out and slowly remind them of the teachings of Rasulullah. They went out. Then they came back. They said, oh Imam, nobody's listening. He said, who are you speaking to? They said, we're speaking to the elders. He said, no, go and find the youth of the community. The elders, their mindset is already firm and structured. We're not going to get through to any. And unfortunately, sometimes there is a stigma in our communities that many of the elders have a phrase. What's the phrase? I've heard 1,000 majalis, now it's your turn. Sorry? What do you mean you've heard 1,000 majalis? I guarantee you in those 1,000 majalis, in the year 2008 you'll hear stories you've never heard in 50 years. Who told you 1,000 majalis means you've heard everything? But sometimes you find people who will say this, I've heard everything, every majlis, name the story. No, you haven't heard every story. If you did, 12th Imam would have returned, don't worry about it. So what it shows, here sometimes you have an elder, very firm, rigid in the structure. Nobody can change me. Imam said don't go to them. Those elders of Syria, those elders of Medina, some of them are so rigid, however much you try, he thinks he knows everything. Go to the young ones. The young blood is willing to listen. The heart is open. Number two, the Imam thought, I will make a reform program where I myself teach about the human being's essence and about reform of the human being. The second part of his reform program was the supplications known as Sahifa Sajjadiyah. The aim of a Sahifa Sajjadiyah was what? You see, dua is the link between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam felt that this was clearly missing. That now the people were going back to a very jahiliyyah type of lifestyle. So the Imam wanted reform where a person recognizes his inferiority before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because I remember second Imam was once asked, what's the distance between the heavens and the earth? And he said, the cry of an oppressed person in dua. You see, the second Imam didn't measure the distance physically. He said the cry of an oppressed person in dua is the distance between heaven and earth. Meaning what? Meaning the link that keeps humanity going is dua. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, were it not for your dua, I would not care for you at all. But it's your dua that shows me that humility remains inside you and you remain understanding my position. That's why in Sahifa Sajjadiyah there are many different types of du'as. Many times people come up to me, they ask the question, we feel there is hasad or najar on our families, what should we recite? Sometimes people come and ask the question, we are in a time of affliction, what should we recite? Sometimes people ask, we are going through a time of trial, what should we recite? Had they pondered on the index of a Sahifa Sajjadiyah, they would have seen that Imam has given you a supplication for every area of your life. Every area of your life there is a supplication. Why? Because the Imam knew if there is a broken link between you and your Creator, the human being can cause destruction to the society around him. But if the link is maintained, a humility is maintained. And if the humility is maintained, respect for the creation is maintained. Why? Because when you know that you came from a drop of semen, and you know that you leave as a piece of dust, you do not know when you came, and you do not know when you are going. So why should you walk around thinking you know everything? The idea was to maintain a humility. He wrote a Sahih Sajjadiyah, then another of the du'as which he left behind for us, Du'a Makarim al-Akhlaq. Because again he recognized that morality had to be introduced within the community in order that mankind respected each other. Because he could not fathom how, number one, you can leave a group of your fellow Muslim brothers without water. Number two, you would trample on the body of the grandson of Rasulullah. 10 horses trampled on the body of the grandson of Rasulullah. He thought to himself, these people have left humanity. They are even now less than an animal. So therefore it is vital for me to reintroduce the morality which my grandfather came to introduce. For what did Rasulullah say? إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I have been sent to perfect the morals of mankind. And so the Imam wanted to bring this program back. The third way was through Risalat al-Huquq. Risalat al-Huquq, when he wrote it, he made sure that the haqq of every creation of Allah and every aspect of worshipping Allah and every aspect of our own souls was discussed in Risalat al-Huquq. And therefore, when we begin the discussion of Risalat al-Huquq, the first discussion anybody has to look at is the concept of haqq and huquq. Because haqq, or our huquq, many times we complain, he took my haqq, that was my haqq. The haqq belongs to him. The movement of the human being is this idea of talking about your rights and the rights of those around you. Because every creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been given a right. And therefore the discussion has been one which has been looked at throughout years by humanity. For example, you look at Cyrus the Great. He wrote an Edict of Rights. You look at Ashoka of India, wrote the Edict of Rights. You look at the Bill of Rights in England. You look at the French Declaration of Rights, the US Independence and Declaration of Rights. You look at the Declaration of Human Rights and the United Nations Conventions. Everywhere throughout history, there has been a society which has sought to write a declaration or a convention or a treaty of human rights. Why? Because a society cannot be pure without having a particular treaty looking at the rights of the subjects and the citizens of that society. As in now, when you get the passport of a country, doesn't it say either in the documents of the passport or in the front page of the passport, the rights of the citizen, what you are allowed to do? Why? Because it then allows the citizen to feel secure within the state in which they live. Therefore, when you look at famous names such as Paine and Mill and Hegel, all of their philosophy is based on what are the rights of the human being. And that's why in Western societies today, there is not a single country without a declaration of the rights of that country. And then all the countries supposedly get together for the Declaration of Human Rights, and the United Nations come together to look at the rights of all communities. However, there is a problem. And the problem is that in many Western societies, there is an idea that Islam and human rights are incompatible. There is a problem that when you go to many of the Western media, you find them saying the secular way and the religious way is incompatible. And the reason they fear Islam when it comes to rights is sometimes because of outspoken critics and sometimes because of the Muslims themselves. Let me explain. You see, recently you have some people who claim to be ex-Muslims who wrote attacking the religion of Islam. When they write attacking the religion of Islam, automatically they say that the religion of Islam does not give rights to the human being. For example, Irshad Manji from the community in Canada wrote a book, The Trouble with Islam. What's it called? The Trouble with Islam. In this book she makes it clear that Islam and secular thought are incompatible, because Islam does not give rights to its citizens. There are many who are oppressed, especially the female. And therefore this book gives the impression to the Western media that Islam has no treatise for human rights. Likewise, you find, for example, recently on YouTube, there is a film I advise you all to go and watch. Those of you who have YouTube, go and type fitna on YouTube and watch this 17-minute film that was produced by a politician in Holland. What he does is he takes all the verses of the Quran which seem quite violent out of context. Like Surah 9 verse 5, kill the disbelievers wherever you see them. Now imagine, if you read that verse, wouldn't you think Islam would never promote human rights? As in, if you read Surah 9 verse 5, kill the disbelievers wherever you see them, and surround them and slay them. If I don't know what Surah At-Tawbah is about, and I don't know why Surah At-Tawbah began without Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and I do not know when Surah At-Tawbah was revealed, then I myself as a Muslim don't know how to explain this verse. Number 3, Salman Rushdie, 1989, wrote the book The Satanic Verses. And in the Satanic Verses, he looked at a very blasphemous way, not only against Islam, even if I'm not mistaken, Rama and Sita from Hinduism even got an attack, and others got an attack. But of course Islam, because it has a social structure, it's the only one which spoke out. Others have no social structure. What happened was, suddenly the Ayatollah put a fatwa on him, apostate, and is to be killed. Automatically the news goes round, Islam does not give human rights to any of its citizens. And recently the Archbishop of Canterbury in the UK wrote a very good article where he tried to show it's not that we don't want Islam to be in this country, it's that sometimes the ignorance of the Muslims makes us think twice. Let me explain. Amir al-Mu'mineen used to say, our enemies are not the Christians and the Jews, our enemies is our own ignorance. That sometimes our behavior is what causes people to think that religion does not give rights to anyone. The Archbishop of Canterbury presented a paper. What did he say? He came forward and he said, why shouldn't there be Sharia law in this country? As in, why is it that the Jewish community have the Beth Din, which is their own Jewish court, but the Muslim community does not have their own court? Why is it? It's unfair that the Jewish community, if they have a case, a civil issue, can go to their legal system, but the Muslim community cannot go. And so, basing this opinion, he then said, however, there's a couple of difficulties which we need to address with the Muslim world in order for Muslim law to be applied. Listen to what he said. He said the first difficulty is, we do not know what in Islam is culture and what is religion. Because imagine a Westerner comes to our weddings, that will answer the question for you. Because our weddings, imagine the Archbishop came, he wouldn't know what's culture and what's religion. True? So he said, how can we then formulate Sharia law in this country if the Muslims themselves sometimes don't know what is cultural and what is religion? How do you then put law? Then he said, Islam also has many schools of law. So if now a civil case came to an Islamic court and you have a Hanafi wife marrying a Ja'fari husband, how do you give a legal verdict? According to the Ja'fari or according to the Hanafi? Yet the Archbishop highlighted that there is no denial that Sharia does give rights to the human being. It's just that the Muslims have to present these rights in a better manner, so that the world is not taken by Salman Rushdie or by the film Fitna or by Irshad Manji, but rather looks at the true essence of the teaching of Muhammad. Imagine. The problem between Western ideology and the Islamic concept of human rights, you see, there's a great paper I recommend you to read by somebody called Raimundo Panikkar. In 1989 he wrote a paper called, Is the Notion of Human Rights a Western Concept? Why? Because in his opinion, the Human Rights Declaration is simply 3 centuries of Western philosophical thought, nothing else. And he looks at the idea that the Western concept of human rights is relative. One day they put one law, the next century that may be changed completely. Who they give rights to and who they don't does not come from Allah, but comes from the wishes of the government of the time. Whereas in Islam, the rights are fixed from the time of Rasulullah until today. No ruler is above the law. In the Western nation, a ruler may come to you in the 19th century and say, this is the rights of somebody. Then in the 21st say, no, in my opinion you shouldn't have those rights, abolish it. Western notion of rights is something relative and open to the wishes of the ruling party. Let me give you 3 examples before we go on to what Islam says about rights. In the Western nations, the area of sexual orientation, what you decide to choose as your orientation. A couple of centuries ago, homosexuality was something looked down at. Nobody had a right to be a homosexual. Nobody. And if you were looked down upon in the society. Then recently, the coin has turned completely the other way. That now there are marriages which are normal. Now even himself, the Archbishop of Canterbury, in one paper he wrote that this type of love in homosexuality could reflect the love of God. So a couple of centuries earlier, there was no right to be homosexual. But then now, get married, you have a particular certificate, a wedding, and you are also able to adopt children within the household. Here it shows you that the idea of human rights in Western thought does not originate from a message from the heavens. It is simply the wishes of the governing body of the time. I'll give you a second example. Alcohol. A couple of centuries ago, you were allowed to drink alcohol, but there was a certain age limit, and at the same time, there were certain curfews. Recently in the UK, they've allowed the bars to be open 24 hours. Couple of centuries ago, the government of the time, the rights they gave the citizen was based on the church. Whereas now it's based on the wishes of the government of the time. Suddenly human rights become something relative. Likewise, on a third area, the taking of drugs. In a certain part of Europe, taking drugs was seen as illegal a couple of centuries ago. Whereas there are certain parts of Europe now, there are cafes where you are able to go and smoke what you want to smoke. What Islam came forward and said is that a society can be built on rights to the human being, but those rights are fixed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the Imams have got no right to legislate rights. No human being can legislate what is a right for another human being except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Only Allah can tell you what is your rights. That's why when you come forward to see the rights in the religion of Islam, we find that there are a number of rights which an Islamic state seeks to build. Before we go into Risalat al-Huquq, what does Islam envisage as its rights? Let's understand. The first right of any Islamic state is the right of religion. Meaning what? Meaning that anyone who says Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah is allowed to practice their religion within the Islamic state. This looks after a few groups of people. The first group of people it looks after are the Muslims. As soon as they say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, a Muslim is allowed to practice. Don't get me wrong. There are some states in the world where a Muslim says Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah and they are oppressed in a Muslim land. No need to mention names. If you don't believe in the ideology of that country, they do not allow you to practice openly, even though you are another madhab. For example, they have a madhab, we have a madhab. If now in an Islamic state I am a Ja'fari, but there is a Hanafi, and a Maliki, and a Shafi'i, and a Hanbali, and a Zaydi, and a Ismaili, Are they allowed to live within the Islamic State? Yes, they are. Do they have the right to practice their religion? Of course they have their right. It is unfortunate that certain countries in the Middle East, if you are a Ja'fari, they do not allow you to practice your religion openly. Whereas the right of an Islamic State is that anybody who says Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Why? Because that means even a Christian and a Jew and a Zoroastrian who say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, they may not say the next line, but they remain people of the book. And the people of the book have the right to practice their religion in an Islamic State. They are known as what in the Arabic language? Dhimmi. A dhimmi lives in the Islamic State. All he has to do is pay a jizya, a tax. As soon as they pay that tax, they are allowed to practice their religion as they want. The Jews of Medina and the Christians of Medina, or the Christians of Najran, were allowed to go back to their churches and practice openly, without nobody interfering in that practice. The Christians of Najran were the ones who came for the event of Mubahala. When they came to see Rasulullah, they used to have a place of worship called Ka'bat Najran. Our Kaaba in Mecca, they used to have Ka'bat Najran, the Kaaba of Najran. It was a church. As soon as they signed the treaty with Rasulullah said, "Oh Christians of Najran, you have every right now to go to your church and worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." Likewise, in the constitution of Medina, which is one of the greatest piece of rights ever written by Rasulullah, go and read the constitution of Medina. It is vital that you read it. Rasulullah says any Jewish person is allowed to worship in their synagogues, and the Muslims worship in their mosques. If a Muslim attacks a Jew, the Muslim is to be punished. And if the Jew attacks a Muslim, the Jew is to be punished. And if both of them have a problem with each other, each of them has their own court. Otherwise the final decision is with me as the head of the Islamic State. Number one, the right of religion. Then number two, the right of property. Anybody living in the Islamic State has the right to have their own property, and that nobody is allowed to interfere with that property. That's why the West, when they look at Islam, they say, look how barbaric Islam is. Why? They say, did you know in Islam, if you steal, they cut off your hands? Well, it's better than the British legal system, where if you try and stop the thief, you try and stop him, you go to prison. Please explain to me the logic of that. Someone is stealing my house. I pick up a baseball bat. I want to stop the man. But because I am trying to stop him and I hurt him, I have to go to prison. He gets away with it. Is that going to look after our properties? As in, if that's going to be the case, I should take everything out of my valuables with me wherever I go. In Islam, they said Islam is barbaric. Why? Because it stops thieves by cutting their hands. Number one, there are 19 conditions before you can cut. How many? 19, not one. So if I find someone's just stolen, can I just cut their hands? No. 19 conditions have to be passed. Is he sane or insane? Is he poor or no? Is it a year of famine or no? Does he know the laws of Islam or no? All of these, and there are more conditions which have to be passed. Furthermore, when you cut somebody's area, cutting that area does not mean they are not able to repent. No. Islam done this to protect society, but Islam also allowed that thief to repent. Why? In the court of Al-Mu'tasim, they bought him a thief. They asked him, this person tried to steal someone's property. They said to him, where shall we cut from? Mu'tasim said, how would I know? Doesn't know. Cut anywhere. They said to him, but surely there has to be a place. He said, ask the judges, see what they say. One judge said, cut the whole of his hand from the shoulder area. Another said, cut this area, the elbow. Another said, cut the wrist. He said, I don't want to listen to any of you. Get me Imam Sajjad. He got Imam Sajjad. Imam Sajjad came. Mu'tasim said, I want you to give us a ruling. somebody has tried to steal someone's property, where do we cut from? After Imam checked everything, he said, Mu'tasim, you don't need me to give a decision, you've already got people. He said, no, I want you to give the decision. Imam said, in the school of Ahl al-Bayt, you only cut the fingers. Said to him, why? He said, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says there are 7 parts of the body which must be in sujood. And amongst them is the palm. So if this person repents, he must be able to pray again. So if you move the fingers, he still has his palm to go and sujood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the point here was that the second right was what? The right of property. Nobody can interfere in your property. The moment you bought a property, nobody is able to purchase it without your agreement, and so on. The third right is the right of honor, meaning what? How many verses in the Quran do you see which say, do not spy on people, do not abuse people, do not make fun of one group ahead of another group of people? All of these came to bring honor. Likewise, the Quran says in terms of the rights of honor, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. Adultery was seen as being what? As attacking the honor of the human being. Every human has a right to have their families protected. Adultery is that which attacks the honor, and that's why Islam is severe with adultery. If a person is married and they commit adultery in an Islamic state, there is a ruling, according to certain scholars, of stoning to death. If, however, they are not married, there is a ruling of being lashed 100 times. But there are conditions as well. When Islam said there is the right of honor and said adultery is to be punished, Islam also said that there are conditions which have to be fulfilled. It's not easy. Number one, it has to be an Islamic state. If I find someone committing adultery here in Dar es Salaam High Street, I cannot pick him up and suddenly kill him. No. Has to be a proper Islamic state. Number two, 4 witnesses must see the same thing at the same time and report it at the same time. How many? 4. I think it's very rare to have a case of 4 people witnessing such an event so clearly. But let's hope our societies don't reach that level. And even then there are conditions. One day they brought a group of people that committed adultery to the second Khalifa. He said, what's wrong? They said they've committed adultery. He said, okay, how many of them? 5. He said, kill all of them. Ali ibn Abi Talib said, wait. There are 5 different rulings for each one. Excuse me, what are you? He said, I'm a dhimmi. I'm a non-Muslim in the state. And you? He said, I'm married. And you? I'm not married, but I committed adultery. And you? I'm a slave. And you? I don't know what I am. Ali ibn Abi Talib said, as for the first one of you, the non-Muslim in an Islamic state, you are to be beheaded. Because you have protection in an Islamic state. As we said, you pay the jizya, you have protection. But for you to go and commit adultery with a Muslim woman in the Islamic state while you are a non-Muslim living here, that's a punishment. Then he said, as for the second person who is married has to be stoned to death. The third person, give him 100 lashes because he is not married but he committed adultery. Do you know why the difference is there? Because the one who is married, he has already got access. The one who's not married doesn't have access. So the one who's married should not have an excuse. He's already got something to. He said, as for the fourth one of you, the slave, only whip him 50 times because he's a slave. 5th one, let him go because he's insane. He doesn't even know what he is. The right of what? The right of honor. Then there is the right of protest against the government. In Islam, an Islamic state gives you the right to protest against the government. When Ali ibn Abi Talib was Khalifa of the Muslims, the right was given to anyone, if they felt Amir al-Mu'mineen had opposed them, to even take Ali ibn Abi Talib to court. Tell me which government today can I take a certain leader, no need to mention names, can I even reach his house to take him to court? If I feel there are war crimes on his name, can I take him to court? Milosevic, they took him to court, he had a heart attack. Karadzic, they took him to court, God knows what will happen. Some leaders are above the law. Ali ibn Abi Talib one day saw a coat of steel which he felt belonged to him. He said to the man, excuse me, this belongs to me. The man said, no, it belongs to me. Ali ibn Abi Talib said, I promise you, I know my coats. It belongs to me. Man said, I don't care, I'll take you to court. The man was a Christian and Ali ibn Abi Talib was Khalifa. A Christian living in the Muslim state takes the Khalifa to court. Ali ibn Abi Talib said, we'll go. When they went to court, the judge said, Abu al-Hasan, what's the problem? Ali ibn Abi Talib said, don't call me Abu al-Hasan. Don't lower his status and call me by my title. We are both equal in the eyes of the law. Call me Ali, the son of Abu Talib. So then he said, what's the problem? The Christian said, this belongs to me. The judge said, Ali, he said, it belongs to me. The judge said to Imam Ali, do you have any witnesses? Imam Ali said, I'm sorry, I don't have any witnesses. At this moment the judge said, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to award the court case to whom? Towards the Christian. When the Christian left, you know what he said? He came forward and he said, today I have seen the justice of God on earth. He said, why? He said, I am a Christian living in a Muslim state. I have the audacity to take the Khalifa to court. And this Khalifa treats me with respect. And the ruling is given against him. And yet he walks away by saying, no problem, take your coat of steel. He went towards Imam and congratulated the Imam. The right of taking the governor to court is a right within the Islamic State. All of these rights, the rights of religion, the rights of honor, the rights of property, the rights of taking the governor to law, all of these rights are compatible with Western states. The only difference is that the rights given by Islam are fixed by Allah, whereas the rights given in a Western state are fixed according to the wishes of the government of the time. That's the difference. The moment this is understood as a basis, then we can go into Imam's Risala tomorrow and look at the way he looks at each of the rights and see how they can be implemented in an Islamic state. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.